Welcome to the weekend edition of the Fear and Greed Business Headlines, the week that was, a wrap of the biggest stories over the past week. I'm Sean Aylmer. It was a big week for corporate earnings, a big week for COVID, for the environment, and of course for equity markets. Let's start with those equity markets. Investors don't seem to know the meaning of the word caution. Traders are buying up stocks with markets in Australia, North America and Europe all hitting record highs during the week. A couple of things are driving stocks. People are looking beyond the current wave of COVID cases and lockdowns, of course. They're presuming the economy will bounce back when these things end. And that's exactly what happened last year. They expect more of it. Also, corporate earnings on Wall Street, in London, across Europe, and so far in Australia have been pretty good, with some notable exceptions. Interest rates are low, so where else are you going to put your money? And helping things along are massive spending packages from governments around the world, including US President Joe Biden's $1 trillion infrastructure package that passed the Senate this week. Away from equities, things were a little more somber. The price of gold has fallen in recent weeks and is trading around $1,750 an ounce. Oil fell back on pressure from the United States on OPEC to increase production, and forecasts that the number of planes in the sky and cars on the road will drop in the short term due to COVID. The Aussie dollar continued to trade in that 73 to 74 cent range, but all you cryptocurrency advocates, and I know you're all out there, you'll be smiling again because digital units rose during the week. Market leader Bitcoin got as high as $46,000 a unit, and by the end of the week was trading around $44,000 a unit. I still don't understand. Iron ore prices kept falling this week. That certainly took the heat out of the big three miners' share prices, but coal prices, they just kept going. COVID. I think we're all sick and tired of it dominating our daily lives. I've been through high school already. I didn't want to homeschool and go through it again. Restaurants. I hate the sight of stacked chairs in the local Thai where I go to buy my takeaway. It just reminds me that I can't eat there anymore. And the beach. I live more than 10 kilometres from my closest beach. I can't even remember what it looks like. Anyway, the COVID numbers keep climbing. New South Wales daily figures are measured in the 300s, with plenty of people infectious in the community, including a growing number of cases in regional areas. Premier Gladys Berejiklian changed her language this week, hinting at reopening the economy when people got vaccinated, rather than when there were zero cases. Prime Minister Scott Morrison wasn't impressed. He wants all the premiers to stick to the plan of reopening at 70% vax rates. Maybe the snap lockdown in Canberra on Thursday, affecting the lodge, will help him change his mind. Victoria's lockdown continued. The case numbers aren't out of control, but there are still people in the community catching COVID. Southeast Queensland isn't in lockdown, though it still has a dribble of cases. What's concerning, which keeps coming through in the Brisbane figures, is the number of children catching the virus. At least the Moderna vaccination got the green light this week, and the federal government said it will import 10 million doses before the end of the year. The economy is certainly slowing thanks to the lockdowns. National Australia Bank's business sentiment reading and the Westpac Melbourne Institute's consumer sentiment index both dropped in July. It's not surprising given the lockdowns, and it suggests investing will take a hit, as will sales, and that will hurt the economy. Nothing like a news poll to get the Prime Minister and opposition leaders' attention. The latest from The Australian shows the federal government in its worst electoral position since the bushfires of last summer, behind 53 to 47% on a preferred party basis. There was the story this week of the gambling addict who is suing Crown Resorts for $4.5 million, alleging the gaming giant breached consumer laws after he was encouraged to continue betting, even though he was in debt, and even though his mother had given Crown a call and said he should be banned. It's the first individual claim since the Victorian Royal Commission into Crown. Later in the week, Crown admitted in its final submission to the Commission that if its licence was suspended or it was banned, it would need to lend out its South Bank operations under the terms of its 99-year lease. In international news, it was a huge week for the environment. The most significant report on the environment globally, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth report, said the world was likely to reach 1.5 degrees of warming by 2040, even if there were deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. The report found that human activity had already warmed the planet by 1.1 degrees Celsius since the Industrial Revolution. Sea levels had risen at a rate higher than the global average in recent decades. Snow cover and depth had decreased and were likely to fall further. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said the report was a code red for humanity. It also said Australia, because it was an island, had been hit relatively hard. Australia's climate has risen about 1.4 degrees over the last 110 years, and that's meant hotter summers and colder winters. The prospect of ongoing peace in Afghanistan looks unlikely just weeks before the final US troops withdraw. Taliban insurgents have seized provincial cities as violence across the country escalates. The US Embassy in Kabul has told all US citizens to leave immediately. President Joe Biden said the US had spent $20 trillion in the country over the past 2 decades, and it was time to leave it to its own devices. Vaccination rates in European economies are rising. Both France and Spain have introduced a no-vax, no-play policy. Unless you're vaccinated, then you can't go to restaurants and cinemas and plenty of other places. While it has triggered riots in Paris, both countries have experienced a surge in vaccination rates in the past 2 weeks and now rank alongside Britain in terms of success. Maybe there's a lesson there for the local premiers. Amazon will start directly paying compensation to customers who are affected by dangerous products sold by independent sellers in its store. Amazon is under pressure over the safety of goods on its site. And China released a 5-year plan which will strengthen Beijing's control over strategic sectors, including technology and healthcare. The Communist Party Central Committee said it would expand government legislation and build a modern regulatory environment to meet people's ever-growing demands for a good life. I wonder who's defining what a good life is. It was a busy week in corporate Australia as earnings season went into full swing. Commonwealth Bank outlined a bumper profit and a whopping share buyback and dividend. The bank is doing well in the home lending market and the business lending market, and its share price hit a new record after Wednesday's announcement before falling back a bit. It's a strong result, but banks don't like low interest rates because it's harder for them to make money, and Afterpay and Apple are moving onto their turf. It will be a challenging year ahead. Suncorp said its insurance business, which includes GIO and Aylmer, had done very well and expected the trend to continue. Great for shareholders, maybe not for us that pay house and car insurance though. The group set the tone for the week. Big results, big dividends. Transurban, the toll road operator, said the cost of the Westgate Tunnel could rise by about $3.3 billion to $10 billion. That's what I call a blowout. COVID has hurt Transurban because people aren't using toll roads anywhere near as much. Put the Westgate debacle on top of that, and the company has had a pretty tough year. Energy giant AGL had a shocker. That's the only way you can describe it. It lost more than $2 billion last financial year, which included a massive $2.7 billion in write-downs. And it said things weren't getting much better. The group, which is about to split into two, one business for the coal-fired power stations and another for its retail and green assets, wants the government to put in place a framework for getting off fossil fuels. James Hardie said demand for its building materials had surged in North America, Australia and Europe. James Hardie's share prices performed very well over the past year, up 80%. People stuck in their homes during lockdowns start renovating. Or some of those that want to move can't because of soaring house prices, so they start rebuilding. Nice little business, that one. Insurer IAG turned in a poor performance and its chair blamed the business operations. Yes, she took responsibility for it. Nice to see, especially when the result was so poor. AMP, once an icon of the business world in Australia, has a new CEO, and she said she wanted to cut superannuation fees, simplify the business, and ward off the barbarians at the gate wanting part of the fund's management business. AMP announced a big jump in underlying profit. That was some good news after a pretty dreadful 12 months. In contrast, QBE announced a surge in profit and a big jump in its dividend. Property groups Goodman and Mirvac did pretty well, and even Myer, the beleaguered retailer, said it expected to make money this half year. That would be the first time in 4 years. And Telstra, which has more shareholders than any other company, including about 1.1 million retail shareholders, announced its first profit jump in 5 years. More of that in a moment. There was plenty of other corporate news around. National Australia Bank said it will buy Citigroup's consumer business. That means all you people with Citi credit cards are about to get a National Australia Bank credit card. Westpac sold its Australian life insurance business to Tal Daiichi Life Australia for $800 million. It's all part of the group's efforts to simplify its business. And Swedish private equity firm EQT made another bid, that's its third, for listed financial services software group Iris, worth $3.2 billion. This time, the Iris board look interested. Now I get to the point in the program where I go through the biggest story of the week, the sleeper story, the most remarkable story, and my favourite story. The biggest story of the week, without doubt, was all the earnings results. Some good, some bad, some in between. What the results showed is just how much money is sloshing around in corporate Australia. Okay, the energy companies like AGL are in all sorts, but the banks and miners have too much money to know what to do with. That should continue next week when more earnings results come out. The sleeper story of the week comes from Telstra. It's hard to say a profit report that makes the front pages is a sleeper, but there was some pretty interesting detail in the telco's announcement that, unless you were reading closely, got overlooked. The country's 11th largest company made $1.9 billion last financial year, fair enough, but what got my attention was two comments from Chief Executive Andy Penn. The first was that a turning point had been reached because the disruption from the NBN, which has been going on for a decade, had ended. And the second was the sheer size of the efficiency gains at the group since 2017. 1,880 products down to just 20. A reduction in the workforce of 25,000 people. Costs are down by $2.3 billion. A more efficient operation, less disruption in the marketplace. That should be good news for Telstra shareholders. The most remarkable story came from InvoCare, the funeral operator that owns brands including White Lady and Simplicity Funerals. Apparently those damn millennials are into virtual funerals. Is nothing sacred anymore? I'm being a bit rough here because COVID has forced people to hold funerals online and have digital memorials. Interesting thing, people spend about 10% on a funeral of what they do on a wedding. So that might be $60,000 on the wedding and $6,000 on the funeral. Now that figure comes from someone who knows, and he pointed out that they are both basically celebrations, just with one less guest. Why the gap? My favourite story involved Cobram Estate. When it listed on the ASX this week, I knew the name but couldn't bring it to mind. Later in the day, I looked into the pantry and there was a bottle of Cobram olive oil. Aha! So I did a bit of research and it turns out that Cobram produces around 70% of the olive oil made in Australia, and it's a big supplier to the United States. It listed this week and is valued at $700 million. That is a hell of a lot of olive trees. And that's everything you need to know from the last week. I'm Sean Aylmer. I'll be back on Monday morning with the Fear and Greed business headlines. I look forward to your company then.